Hey guys, how are you doing tonight? Hope you're having a great week, and I'm really looking forward to spending some time with you in a few moments here in the book of Proverbs. And I want to encourage you to share tonight's teaching. Just hit the share button if you're watching it on YouTube or you're watching it on Facebook or however you're watching tonight. Just hit the share button. As you know, we've been in the book of Proverbs and we've been talking about wisdom, wise behavior. And tonight we're going to continue in the book of Proverbs. We're going to talk about wise words. You see, it's hard for us to exercise wisdom in our life if we don't exercise wisdom in what we say. And I want to start out tonight in Proverbs chapter 13, verse number 3. Here's what Solomon said: "Those who control their tongue will have a long life. Opening your mouth can ruin everything." Those that control their tongue, manage the words that come out of their mouth, they're going to have a long life, a blessed life. But those of us that cannot control what comes out of our mouth, it's going to ruin everything in our life. You know, this is a powerful statement that he gives us here. I was reading the other day about speech and about our words, and they estimate that there's over 800,000 words in the English language. That's a lot of words. And then what fascinated me is they said that the average person knows somewhere between 20 and 30,000 words. And they say that on a daily basis, on an average day, that the average person speaks somewhere between 7 and 10,000 words. That's hard for me to wrap my mind around, although I think some people probably speak more than that because they're always talking. All right? But it's not the number of words that we speak, it's the kind of words that we speak. Solomon's talking about guarding our words or speaking the right words, words of wisdom. We're going to talk about that tonight and probably next week as well. I want to share a principle with you, and I would encourage you to write this principle down. Our life is composed by our thoughts, but it is defined and directed by our words. Let me say it again. Our life is composed by our thoughts. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. But our life is defined and directed by what comes out of our mouth. Out of the abundance of our heart, the mouth speaks. So what that means is we are the sum total of what we think and what we say. The sum total of what we think and what we say. So here's what we need to remember. Communication, the ability to communicate, is a blessing. Communication is a blessing. And sometimes I think we forget that because it's so easy for us to communicate today. We can talk to one another, we can pick up the phone and text one another, we can FaceTime one another, we can email one another. So many different words, or so many different ways, I should say, to communicate in our world today. And if we think about it, God has always communicated with His people. And He has given us the ability to communicate with Him and to communicate with one another. So communication is a blessing. Those of you that are parents, I'm sure you remember when you had your children and they were very small, how you were anticipating and waiting for them to utter their first words. You know, we used to get down on the floor with our kids and I'd get down there and say daddy, daddy, say daddy. Diane would do the same thing, say mommy. And eventually the first word came out, then the second word. And when that happened, we realized that now we were going to be able to communicate with our children and them with us in a completely different way. Prior to them being able to speak, communication was just by touch. But now they could express to us and we could express to them and we could understand their feelings and their thoughts and their concerns. It was a very special time because communication is a blessing. When you think about God communicating, we go back to the beginning in the book of Genesis. And everything that God created, He created by the spoken word. In Genesis chapter 1, verse number 3, here's what it says. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. I noticed in Genesis chapter 1 that 9 different times in the creation process, the Bible records, then God said. So everything that God created, He created by the spoken word. He created this world by the spoken word. And every time we speak to God, and every time we are able to speak and communicate to one another, my friend, it is a blessing from heaven. But every blessing brings responsibility. Every blessing in our life brings responsibility. I feel when God blesses us with time, we're responsible with how we manage our time. If God blesses us with talents and abilities, we're responsible for how we manage them. If He blesses us with finances, we're responsible with how we steward or manage those finances. And when He blesses us with the ability to speak to one another and communicate to one another, we're responsible with how we communicate and the words that come out of our mouth. So again, look in Proverbs chapter 21 this time, verse number 23. Proverbs 21:23. Solomon said, "Watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you will stay out of trouble." Watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut. And if you do that, you'll stay out of trouble. Hello? Could he be any more clear? What's he saying to us? Big mouth, big trouble. I think there's approximately 915 verses in the book of Proverbs. And I think somewhere maybe between 115 and 120 verses deals with the subject of our words, our mouth, our tongue, the kind of conversations that we have. In fact, in the New Testament, even Jesus spoke about the importance of our words. In Matthew chapter 12, I want to turn over there for just a second. Matthew chapter 12, and we're going to look at verse number 36. Here's what Jesus said. "But I tell you that every careless word that people speak, they shall give an accounting for it on the day of judgment." Every careless word that we speak, we're going to give an account for it. Jesus is telling us the same thing Solomon told us. Our words matter. And we have to remember that eventually, not only are we going to give an account for our actions, but we're going to give an account for our words and how we communicated with different people. So just for the fun of it, let's take a real quick test, a 4-question test, okay? And so I'm going to ask you a question. How do you respond to this? How do I respond to this? Are we the kind of person that thinks before we speak? Are we the kind of person that thinks while we speak? Are we the kind of person that thinks after we speak? Or are we the kind of person that speaks and never thinks? That's what gets us into trouble. Big mouth, big trouble. So, communication is a blessing. And with every blessing comes responsibility. And we cannot forget the power that our words have. There's tremendous power in our words. In fact, I want us to go to the book of James in the New Testament. The book of James, and we're going to look at chapter 3, okay? James chapter 3. James talks about the power of our words influencing, the power to influence. In verse number 2, he said, "Indeed, we all make many mistakes. For if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect." Perfect means mature. So if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect, and we could also control ourselves in every other way. We can make a large horse go wherever we want by means of a small bit in its mouth. And a small rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even through strong winds. So what's James telling us? He's saying that even though our tongue is a small member of our body, that member has tremendous influence. But we have to be able to control our tongue. We have to be able to control what's coming out of our mouth and what we say to other people. And James gives us an illustration here. He talks about the bits in a horse's mouth. that small bit in that large animal's mouth can control the direction or the speed of that animal. And then he says, even a rudder on a ship. If you've seen a big ocean liner or a cruise ship, and you see the rudders on those ships, they are so small compared to the size of that ship. And yet that rudder, according to James, can control the direction of that ship even in adverse winds, strong winds that may want to take the ship off course. The pilot can control the direction of that ship. Now, both of these instruments are small compared to what they're controlling, and both of these instruments overcome or control contrary forces. So what's James saying? Our tongue must overcome the forces of our flesh, the forces of anger, the forces of bitterness, our circumstances that we face in our life, and even the temptation of the enemy for us to say things that we really don't need to say, things that aren't productive. So James is telling us we must control our tongue. And we're going to talk more about this next week, more about the power of our words. But again, James here talking about the bit and the rudder. You know, I love horses. Let me say it this way. I love horses. They're beautiful animals. But I've never gotten along well with horses. And I know that a horse, like most animals, has instinct. And when somebody comes up to a horse or gets on a horse that doesn't know how to manage a horse, or maybe that has, fear about controlling the horse, that horse picks up on that. I remember years and years ago when I was a teenager, a good friend of mine, Blaze Armour, and we went out to stables in Springfield, Illinois to ride horses. And, they got the horse saddled up for us. We got on the horse and off we go. And, we're just doing a little trot, a little walk, and we're just, going down this path. And all of a sudden, the horse decided he wanted to go back to the barn. So his horse turned around, my horse turned around, and not only did they turn around, they started running. Now, we're trying to pull back, like they told us, pull back on the reins, and, the bit will control the horse. Not true, okay? That horse knew that he had a rookie on his back, and there was no way he was going to obey. And that horse ran all the way back. In fact, Blaze's horse ran back, and his saddle started coming loose. True story. He fell off of the horse, and the horse ran to the barn without him. So, here's the bottom line. A bit and a rudder is only as good as the people who control it. Okay? A pilot knows how to control a ship. A captain knows how to control a ship. I don't know how to control a ship. Okay? And I don't obviously know how to ride a horse and control a horse. But James says we can learn to control our tongues. And that's why we need the Holy Spirit. That's why we need the wisdom of God. That's why we need to begin to manage not just how we live, but manage what's in our heart, and more importantly, what comes out of our mouth. Our words have influence. I want you to think about it the rest of this week. In fact, let's do this. Let's really think about what's coming out of our mouth, and let's learn to think before we speak. Let's learn to consider how our words are going to have influence on other people. All right? That's our challenge for this week, and I'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday night.